There are a few ways to ask a question during the webinar. You can use the Q&A feature, the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you or call on you to unmute yourself to ask your question. You can find these features in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you may need to hover over your mouse or tap your phone screen to make that toolbar appear. You can type your questions into the Q&A or chat at any time, and I will relay them to the presenter or panel when we pause to answer questions. You can also raise your hand at any time if you want to ask your question yourself. So we may stop a couple times during the presentation. Some of these might go all the way through, just depending on the presenter and how long it's going to be. But we will have a time for Q&A at the end of each segment. This training is provided to key stakeholders on the LID manual annually, and the primary focus of this training is intended to review updates and changes to the LID manual, discuss common mistakes, errors, and omissions, gain applicable information from designers and municipal reviewers regarding additional updates or clarifications needed, and to review relevant case studies that demonstrate how to utilize the manual, navigate situations not addressed by the manual, and to highlight components of successful LID submittals. Although in past years, this training has been broken up to be focused only on designers or engineers or review staff, we've combined this year's training to include both designers and reviewers, and hope that all of you will participate in the conversation and dialogue for continued success of the LID submittals and assistance with further streamlining of information and processes. Additionally, this training format has shifted away from presenting information for first-time submitters or reviewers to a shorter training focusing on relevant and recent scenarios, updates, challenges, and necessary clarifications. We are planning to develop video content next year that can be downloaded for instructional purposes and refresher training as needed on the basic fundamentals and requirements of LID submittals and how to successfully use the calculator and manual. With that, we are going to record this webinars for future reference. So if you want to refer back to it, we will eventually put this up on a website as well too, so you can refer back to any components of the presentation that we get today. With that, I'm going to pass the baton on to our first presenter, Mr. Brendan Thompson with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Thank you, Nick. Am I able to share my screen? Not while you're sharing, Nick. Or okay, let's see. All right, can you all see my screen? Can you hear me? And can you?
We can hear you, but we can't see your screen, Brendan.
Okay, that's interesting. Oh wait, here we go. How about now?
There we go.
Okay, all right. Well, I am Brendan Thompson, and I am the Municipal Stormwater Coordinator here at the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And in case you don't know, there's 9 regional boards throughout the state, defined by geographic region. In the North Coast here, we go from about Cotati up to the Oregon border, the Klamath, Eel, and Russian River watersheds. And we're also the agency that wrote the stormwater permit that is the subject of today's topic of low impact development requirements. And I was asked to just talk about why these requirements exist and where do they come from, because the municipalities told us that they do get these questions from time to time from inquiring minds. Okay, so let's go back to, we won't go back to 1975 when Phil Collins replaced Peter Gabriel as lead singer of Genesis. We don't want to go there. Has nothing to do with stormwater. But we will go back to the 90s when the Clean Water Act was amended to bring municipal stormwater discharges into the federal NPDES permitting program. And NPDES stands for National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System. And the powers that be at the time recognized that water quality goals weren't being met by only regulating discrete point source discharges from wastewater treatment plants and certain industrial facilities, and that a significant amount of water quality problems were occurring as the result of discharges of stormwater from municipal areas. And so the two amendments, the phase one amendment addressed municipalities over 100,000 people, and the second amendment, phase two, addressed the smaller municipalities. Those amendments required that municipalities adopt pollution prevention programs in several program areas. And the program area that's applicable to low impact development was called post-construction at the time the amendment was, the amendments were made. And post-construction refers to, just like it sounds, the stage of a project from the time construction is completed on into the future for the life of the project. And the Clean Water Act amendments recognize that it's not only the pollutants running off of these developments, but also the quantity of water running off these developments that causes water quality issues downstream. And the Clean Water Act language stated an explicit goal for developments to maintain pre-development runoff conditions to the extent practicable. So it wasn't a hard line, you shall maintain pre-development runoff conditions, but it was definitely a recognized goal. And so out of the recognition that there's these water quality issues associated with pollutants and water quality volume, the Clean Water Act required that both structural and non-structural BMPs be developed and implemented for municipalities to impose on new and redevelopment projects in their jurisdiction. And over time, the sum collection of these BMPs, is, at least in our North Coast region, the term kind of morphed from post-construction BMPs to low impact development, or LID BMPs. And so that's the term we currently use here in the North Coast region and many other parts of the country. I just wanted to point out that you'll see a term called green infrastructure from time to time. And it seems like that term in some places is starting to supplant both LID and post-construction, but not in our region. I just wanted to point that out. I've seen some definitions of green infrastructure where it's synonymous with LID, and I've seen other definitions where LID would be a subset. But so just wanted to point that out. And as far as the Clean Water Act NPDES regulations, most states in the country have been delegated the authority to issue these NPDES permits, and California is no exception. So all of the NPDES permits in California are issued by a regional water board and sometimes the State Water Resources Control Board. And at the top of these NPDES permits, you'll see that it's an NPDES permit because it will say it, but it will also say and waste discharge requirements. And the NPDES permit part of it implements the Clean Water Act, whereas the waste discharge requirement part of these permits implements the California Water Code. So the state takes advantage because the state has its own water quality laws and policies. It can use the NPDES permit to double its waste discharge requirements to implement the California Water Code at the same time it's issuing the NPDES permits. And the requirements may be different and they may go above and beyond the federal requirements, but they can never set a lower standard than what the Clean Water Act requirements require. And so you will notice differences sometimes between what the federal regs require and what the state NPDES permits require. For instance, the statewide phase 2 stormwater permit has a 5,000 square foot new or redevelopment impervious surface threshold that triggers the LID requirements, whereas the Clean Water Act regs have a 1 acre threshold. So like I said, we can go above and beyond what the feds require. And similarly, like I said, we have 9 regional boards throughout the state, each with its own unique water quality issues, each with its own unique water quality regulations. They have TMDLs unique to their regions. They have regulations that are all unique to the region as reflected in their basin plans. So if you Google basin plan and then the name of the respective water board region, you'll find the master planning and regulatory document that that regional board uses. And so the combination of these different regulations that are unique to each board will result in differences in these MS4 permits between regions. For instance, if you have an 8,000 square foot redevelopment project in Cotati, it will not trigger the post-construction requirements here in the North Coast region because it's under 10,000 square feet. But if you just move that project over the hill into Petaluma, it will have to implement LID requirements because the San Francisco Regional Board has a 5,000 square foot threshold. So I just wanted to point out that there's variations between the federal and regional board requirements in MS4 permits. Finally, the current MS4 permit that all the Russian River municipalities are under right now expires in January of 2021. But we do not have a new permit ready to go to take its place on January 6th. So the existing permit will be administratively extended until we can get a new permit out, which we hope to have out by the end of 2021. And in the meantime, you should look forward to an opportunity for a public workshop in mid-2021 where we will present our tentative proposed changes, our vision for the new permit, where we will solicit feedback from you and other stakeholders. So make sure you are on our distribution list so that you can be notified of that. And if you need to find out how to get on that distribution list, you can contact me. Here's my email and phone number. And
Hey, Brendan.
yeah.
Hey, would you mind just backing up just for a second and just tell the group what a TMDL is and why that's applicable? And, you know, we tend to throw a lot of acronyms out because we use them every day, but there are a lot of engineers on the phone that may have never come across that terminology.
Okay, yeah, and Kelsey, Heaven, you can step in if I'm missing anything. A TMDL is called a total maximum daily load, and the all states are required to identify waters within identify creeks and lakes and other bodies of water that are impaired by certain pollutants. And those bodies of water that have these documented impairments, the states have to come up with plans to bring those water bodies into a healthy condition. And so these planning, it requires a long planning process where they do lots of studies and they look at data for the respective pollutants, and then they come up, then they ascribe a maximum amount of the target pollutant that body can absorb and still be healthy, and they start doling out basically, they start rationing out the amount of pollutants that any one source area is allowed to discharge to that water body. And that gets put into regulations, various permits. So for instance, this MS4 permit may, MS4 permits are used to implement these TMDLs. And this is the first time I've ever had to, I've been on the spot to explain what a TMDL is. So I'm sure I missed something, but we can.
Kelsey, did you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll speak briefly on it. Brendan, for the first time having to do that, you did a great job. There's not a whole lot I would add to it. I mean, there's a couple like technical terms that people might have heard and not be sure where it fits in. There's the list of waters that are impaired is called the 303D list, after the section of the Clean Water Act that describes the requirement to produce such a list. And the overall objective is to support the beneficial uses that have been designated for the water body, or those that have not. All beneficial uses, even if we haven't designated them for that water body, someone can bring up through the comment process that there's a particular beneficial use that body of water does serve, and beneficial uses being things like drinking water, agriculture, recreation, and habitat for endangered species and so forth, that we would still have to protect even if we hadn't already designated the water for that beneficial use. So those are just a couple like kind of jargony things that you might hear about. So where there is an adopted TMDL for a water body, for example, the pathogen TMDL that's moving through the process on the Russian River, then, as Brendan said, all existing permits and future permits, whether those are for point source or non-point source, would need to be in line with that scientific total maximum daily load finding, and that's pretty much it. There's one in development right now, several in development right now for the Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed, which I'm heading up. So if anyone has specific questions about that, we can take those offline. But that would involve sediment, phosphorus, dissolved oxygen, and temperature for that watershed specifically.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. We've got about 5 minutes, and we've got a really great resource here with the regional board. So we've got the MS4 permit coordinator, if I'm saying that right, or manager, Brendan Thompson. Kelsey Cody deals with the TMDL unit, and then we have Heaven Moore, who oversees the MS4 and industrial permits and construction general permits. And so I just wanted to open up to the group. And also I would mention that Heaven Moore is kind of one of the founders or co-founders of the LID manual in this region. So she has a lot of history and context regarding the evolution of where this is coming from. Unfortunately, our time with the regional board is limited today. So here would be your chance to ask questions. However, if there are more after our presentation, we're happy to capture those and get them and then circle back around with the board and then get them out to the group as well. So we can do that for you as also. So I just want to open it up for the next 4 or 5 minutes here, just to see if there's any general questions from the group directly to the regional board, or concerns or comments or pats on the back. Don't see any hands raised. I don't see anything unmuted, and nothing in chat. See, I told you, Brendan, it was going to be one way or the other. They were going to either bombard you with a ton of questions, or most likely they just woke up and had their first cup of coffee and nobody has any questions because we haven't dug in yet. Rich, did I see you unmute over there? Did you have a question, Rich? No? Oh, man. See, I was trying to call someone for you, Brendan.
Evan has a question.
I was just going to add, I think it's great that this is being put on, and really encourage everyone to ask questions and dive in deeply. This opportunity to collaborate kind of across all of our roles, as the regulating agency, as the implementing agency, as the design community, reviewers. I think it's fantastic because all of those perspectives and where we have challenges in whether it's in understanding or in site specific application, I would just encourage, I know I'm not able to stay for the entire time, but I would encourage you to bring those discussions forward. There's no question too small. Maybe you will have a perspective or a thought that somebody else could really benefit from. So that's my plug for speaking up and asking anything. Another thing I just wanted to mention too, I think Brendan and Kelsey did a nice walkthrough of kind of why we have these requirements and where they came from. I did want to point out one other, which is just the basin plan. And I will just candidly share from my previous role as an implementer at the city of Santa Rosa, that the basin plan is often viewed, I think, outside of the agency as a planning document, perhaps as a guiding document only. But truly it is foundational regulation. It is the mechanism by which those region-specific priorities and requirements are set. So while the focus here is on the MS4 permit and then the LID requirements within that are come through the LID manual, I would just encourage everyone also, as you're working in our region and as you're thinking about what's applicable to the receiving waters that you're working in and the projects that you're developing, that the basin plan is a much more relevant and substantive document than I believe it may be viewed as often. And that's my random off-topic ramble for the morning. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
And it looks like everybody's still remaining quiet. So what we'll do is we will try to capture any future questions for the regional board, and we'll loop back around with all of you. If there's any of those questions that we can't answer that need to go to them, and we'll send that out to the distribution list. Thank you, Brendan. Thanks, Heaven. Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate kind of that intro into why we're doing LID. And moving on, we plan to present a case study. So we're going to take you right into kind of some of the meat of it. And we're going to present a case study that looks at a site where groundwater contamination is currently ongoing, where there's currently an ongoing investigation and cleanup. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth Cargay from the town of Windsor and Matt Donahue from TransTech Consultants.
Thanks, Nick. Matt, you want to bring up the slides?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and do screen sharing. But before I did, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Matt Donahue. I'm a private civil engineering consultant. So I'm the designer on this project. And what we're doing is trying to redevelop a gas station that's subject to LID. And it's also a active contaminated site.
And this is Elizabeth Cargay with the town of Windsor. I am an environmental program manager, and I run the stormwater and groundwater programs here. And so together, Matt and I are going to kind of walk you through the project development as it relates to LID design. And it's kind of like we're doing like a dialogue between the design engineer, the town, and what the water board said through the negotiation process on this site. And so this is the Chevron gas station in Windsor. It's right off the freeway. All right, Matt, take it away.
Okay, great. So can everyone see the picture of the Chevron station in Windsor?
Yep.
That's visible?
Yep.
Great. So and hopefully everyone can see this little hand that's moving around. I'm just sort of going to use that to sort of try to show things. But if you have any questions or you want me to highlight something, just let me know. So this is a Chevron station. It's contaminated. In fact, there's a little technician here and some cones because they're doing some groundwater monitoring and sampling. In a second, I'll show you the new proposed site plan, but basically this undeveloped area here on the side is getting developed, and we're expanding the station. So let's see. But, and this is critical, the gas pump area and the underground tank area is to remain as is. So that's a bunch of impervious surface that won't be altered. We're demolishing this building, so that's some impervious surface that'll be replaced. So here's the existing condition exhibit. And so this hatched area here is the existing impervious area. And this area with the trees here is the area that's going to get developed. It was at the time, it was a part of the difficulty of this job was the whole site drained out the front driveway. And even though, and we needed to sort of be able to treat that water, and it was a challenge to sort of to figure out how to treat water that was just rolling out of the driveway into the street. But I'll get to that in a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the initial development plan. And Okay, so let me go over some of the features here. One of the fun things is this pedestrian bridge overhead. So part of this project is to bring a pedestrian bridge over Highway 101 to sort of connect the east and west side of town. And so we were going to put a bioswale here underneath the bridge and try to direct the water from the site into the bioswale. This plan featured a sump here at the top of the bioswale. So water would gravity flow into the sump and then get pumped up into the bioswale, flow down the bioswale, and then if it overflowed, there was an overflow here to get it back to the municipal storm sewer. So this was proposed because we had all this water flowing out of the front here, and we wanted to capture it with a swale and get it to the back, which was at the same elevation as the front. So let's see. So the development plan was to demo this store and build a new store over here, put in a new car wash here, and let's see, and the pedestrian bridge. And it was subject to LID because it created or replaced about 26,000 square feet, which is more than 10,000. Because this is less than an acre, treatment plus delta volume capture is required. So we also proposed a generator that could power the stormwater pump in case of power failure. Let's see, so the water board rejected this proposal because they felt like infiltrating stormwater into the ground at this site would aggravate the contamination situation. So let's see, they gave us a couple of options. They said, well, you can either find an offset project to do your infiltration, or you can sort of mitigate the risk to groundwater, the groundwater resources. And so we tried to do the mitigation at first. And that is this plan. Let me zoom in here. So this is a map from an environmental consultant, and it was a barrier plan. And this blue line here was a proposed groundwater barrier. And so the contamination is here where the tanks are and the dispensers are. And here was the proposed bioswale. And what's not shown on this map, but what is critical to point out, is that groundwater flow direction was from north to south. So basically, the bioswale was directly upgrading of the contamination. So that's obviously what the concern was. So we had proposed putting in a barrier so that when stormwater was discharged here in this bioswale and some of it infiltrated, it could move around the contamination and not go through the contamination and spread it. And I've got a little section drawing here that shows sort of a section view of the barrier. And so what it would be is it'd be a 15 feet steel sheet piling, and then the top 5 feet would be a 20 mil plastic membrane. And then that would direct the groundwater around the, around the contamination. Now this concept was declined by the town, and the town offered a location to do an offset project at Building 100 at Public Works. And I think Elizabeth has got something to say now.
Hey, before you go in, Elizabeth, I think Tony Patton had a quick question. Can we take that real quick?
Sure.
I think you answered my question. I was curious as to what that barrier was. I wanted to know a little bit about the specifics of it. And then, just shortly after I raised my hand, you answered that question. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so from the town's perspective, we talked to the regional water board, and the water board requested that Redwood Oil and the design engineer consult with the town to ensure, they use these words specifically, ensure that the town would be able to effectively oversee the operation of a treatment configuration and ensure compliance with our permit. So we reviewed the location of everything, and we reviewed, groundwater depth and flow and direction and all of that. And so this bioswale, to reiterate, was proposed to be constructed up gradient and within 75 feet of this petroleum groundwater plume. So the past monitoring data showed that a couple of times in the past that the groundwater had come within 2 feet of the ground surface. So it was very shallow. So, but in the end, in reviewing all that data, the town was not supportive of this bioswale of any type of stormwater infiltration at the site due to the potential of mobilizing or dispersing the existing groundwater plume and any potential future groundwater contamination. Our permit specifically says that BMPs should not be proposed in proximity to a contaminated groundwater site where infiltration poses a risk of causing pollutant mobilization, and site constraints prohibit the ability to infiltrate stormwater due to shallow groundwater. So we really felt we could not effectively oversee the operation of a bioswale system up gradient and adjacent to that contamination. And we could not ensure that the stormwater pumped into the bioswale not pose a risk that could affect that existing plume or any future plume. And there's a shell gas station with a petroleum hydrocarbon plume across the street, down gradient of it also. So there was too many factors. So the town just worked with Matt to determine the offset project. So Matt can tell you about this project.
Okay, great. And just the way I have this presentation set up is that first I'm going to show our new site plan without a bioswale and talk about what we are able to accomplish on site. And then we'll look at the offset project, which is on the town of Windsor property. So this is the plan without the bioswale, but it still has some LID features. It has interceptor trees, and it has a chambered separator. Now, a chambered separator, is very low on the priority list in the LID manual for a lot of good reasons. But in my personal opinion, a chambered separator is the best BMP for a gas station because it easily captures hydrocarbon spills, and they're easy to clean out of the separator by using a vacuum truck. Whereas a bioswale, I just think is a terrible BMP to use at a service station because it's not a good way to capture a spill, and then it's very difficult to clean if one gets in there. As we already have a contamination problem. But as you know, the bioswale or the wetland or there's a couple different words for it, is sort of the only option that you have to treat some of these contaminants. Try to treat dissolved metals with some sort of technology. You find it's very difficult to implement on a small scale site like this. And that's my findings from not only working on this project, but also I do industrial stormwater consulting. And it's very difficult to get dissolved metals out of the water once they get in. But the bioswale just allows you to show that as treatment. But a chamber separator provides, it captures lighter than water particles like trash, pathogens, and nutrients, and droplets like hydrocarbons, has a floating scum, and then captures heavier than water particles like metal, trash, sediment, and debris as a bottom layer of solids that can be cleaned out. So the infiltration is offset, but so is some of the treatment. Specifically dissolved metals and other sorts of dissolved minerals or dissolved stuff. And so, okay, so the manual doesn't really address this directly. It's something you have to work with your water board on a case-by-case basis, because we're not only offsetting infiltration here, but we're offsetting some of the treatment specifically for dissolved metals. Okay, so here's our site plan for the building 100, and these hatched areas, which are in color, are the different tributary areas. These green, this is an existing planter, which is perfectly located because the parking lot already drains into it, and it's a perfect place for a bioswale, but I had to add a bioswale in this larger planter to take care of this smaller area, because this middle planter is not big enough. But the LID manual allows infiltration requirement to be met on a site basis. So I'll go to the next. Here's our table showing 26,000 square feet. So that's equivalent to the on-site stuff. So we have a bioswale here in the middle, which is a little too small for the area that drains to it. And we have a bigger bioswale here that's a little bit too big for this eastern drive area to meet the infiltration requirements on a site-by-site basis. We could only make this one 4 feet wide, even though it's in an 8-foot wide channel, because we needed it deep enough to handle the design flood flow. Elizabeth?
Yeah, so we presented this to the water board, and they were open to allowing this offset project, and they wanted to encourage offsite offset, with 2 things that they asked for: to maximize opportunities like interceptor trees on site of the project site, and then requested that the project proposed the chambered separator to see if it could be modified to remove the metals. I think Matt kind of talked about that, but he was able to add some things, right, Matt?
Well, I haven't added anything to the chambered separator that I can show in any sort of meaningful way with calculations will help remove dissolved metals. So this proposal basically says dissolved metals is part of the offset. But the chambered separator does have some socks in it that suck up hydrocarbons and other oily materials, and of course the natural gravity action and everything else that it's good for. But anyway, that's something you have to work with your water board with, because it's just not in the manual about exactly what is offset and what isn't. In this case, we're offsetting infiltration and dissolved metals treatment.
But you did add a few trees, right? You added some.
We added a bunch of interceptor trees.
Yeah, so you did do that. So with those changes, the water board accepted the project, and Matt is now in the design phase. And that's the end of our presentation. Any questions?
Oh, come on, there's got to be at least one question out there. You could even chat. Oh, Tony, you've got a question. Go for it.
Yeah, leave it to me to be the one out here asking questions for about 70.
That's good. Go for it.
Yes, sir. So on those interceptor trees, are they, do they have the, are they the type of trees that have that, you know, there's a structure that the tree goes into, and it has we did some on Stony Point years ago, or are they just trees planted in the ground?
They're just trees planted in the ground. In other words, we're not claiming any sort of infiltration area around them. For obvious reasons, we're not allowed to.
So you're just using the natural, the natural effect that what the tree does, and you're not adding anything to it. Okay.
Yeah, I suppose in my opinion, interceptor trees, capture some storm water and release it more slowly, before it hits the ground. But once it hits the ground, there's no infiltration on this site. So, the treatment then goes to the filter bags and the catch basins, and then to the chambered separator.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else out there with a question?
I have a question, Nick.
Go for it, Rick.
I was just curious, since this project is for an offset for the gas station, does it also provide the LID treatment for the entire city site, or does it only qualify as the offset for the gas station? Say, for example, if you were going to do some future expansion at this location, would this LID that is proposed account for that?
No. So right now it's perfectly balanced at 26,000 square feet of impervious surface created or placed at the project site and treated, shown here, at the offset site. Now there's a lot more to the corporation yard here than just the offset area. There's acres that we could potentially treat. And as you correctly pointed out, there's more undeveloped area here at the site, that in the future, potentially they could come in and ask for a permit to develop it. That's this area right here. But the pedestrian bridge occupies a lot of it, and that's going to be an easement. They're not going to be allowed to go in. So it's actually kind of a small area here, and then this planter behind these parking spaces. So I don't anticipate that would be developed in the future, but if it was, They would have to offset, they either have to show that the site's finally clean, or they'd have to do another offset project.
And I don't think, Rich, that we'd be able to double dip. You know, if we expanded something on our corp yard, we'd probably have to infiltrate somewhere else. We wouldn't be able to use that project as offset also.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that explanation. I was just remembering the courtyard and suspecting it was probably developed before the LID requirements.
Yeah, it was.
We have two more questions in chat here. The first one is, who's responsible for maintenance at the offsite project?
Okay, so the developer here is a company named Redwood Oil Company, and they're going to be responsible for LID maintenance on site and at the offset forever.
Well, what they do is they're going to be paying into our lighting and landscape district. So the town will actually do the work, but they will be responsible for the cost of it.
And are the offsite offsets restricted to the same catchment area?
I'm
I
not,
think typically we like to say, are they restricted to the same trib?
Yeah, well, they're both drained to the Windsor Creek.
yeah, same.
Are there some species of trees that work better for specific contaminants?
You know, I didn't look into that. I didn't study that because the owner wants to do a coast live oak, and that's on the LID list, and so that's what we're doing now. You know, I don't know how much treatment the interceptor trees are providing beyond this sort of detention function. Because again, we're not doing infiltration here, so we're not putting any water into the ground around the tree or anything like that.
And I think some fingers are waking up. I've got one more question or two more questions here. Is can you explain the dissolved metals offset a little bit more?
Sure. So one of the contaminants that we're supposed to address in the LID narrative manual is dissolved metals. But the LID manual says that if we do a bioswale or an infiltration trench or a constructed wetland type feature, that automatically treats dissolved metals. But if we don't do that, then we have to show that we can treat dissolved metals. So most people do some sort of infiltration feature, and therefore they are allowed to, that satisfies the requirement. But because we can't do that here, we needed to show another way that we could treat dissolved metals. And so what we're proposing is that that's part of the offset. And so that's something in the narrative that is not really flushed out, that you're just going to have to work with your water board on about what is actually being offset and what isn't being offset. And anyway, in this case, you know, infiltration is being offset, and so is treatment for dissolved metals. Everything else I feel like we've got a good handle on, including nutrients and trash capture and sediment and debris and stuff like that.
So in interest of time, I do want to have, there's a couple questions that are coming into both you and Elizabeth, Matt, through the chat, if you guys can respond to some of those.
Okay.
If not, we can table those and we can answer them in the Q&A at the end of this session. But I do want to address this one, Elizabeth, and I'm going to direct this one at you.
Okay.
Is do projects that want to do offsite require approval from the regional water board or just the city?
Oh, no, both, for sure. But what was interesting in this project is the board kind of came up with questions for both of us to answer and try to see if we could make the project work. They didn't just say no. They said, well, if you can ensure that the project, that the remediation system is going to work, and if you can, you know, make sure it's going to continue to work, then maybe they'd be open to that. But we were not open to that. We didn't want to take on that kind of liability. So we just said, no, this project, we will not allow that. So we were the ultimate decision makers, but the water board was definitely had to approve all of this.
Great. So I'm gonna table the questions that are in chat. So if you guys can answer those, that's great. If not, like I said, we'll try to address those here at the end.
Okay.
And at minimum, we can loop back around with those that ask those questions to make sure those answers are, or those questions are answered. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the presentation. Our next presenter is going to be Flannery Banks from the city of Santa Rosa. And Flannery is going to be discussing LID manual updates, changes, and recent clarifications.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Flannery Banks. As Nick said, I'm an assistant engineer with the Stormwater and Creeks team here at City of Santa Rosa's Water Department. And just wanted to show you guys my face for a second, the half that's not covered. I know I've been pen pals with a number of you already. Recently joined the city. My first day was back in March, the day before City of Santa Rosa all started work from home. So I know I haven't met a lot of you in person, but I do have a face and I'm not just an email. So with that, we will get going. So at least for the City of Santa Rosa, you'll find our updated manual at the City of Santa Rosa Low Impact Development Technical Design Manual webpage. This is the same webpage that you all should be used to going to and seeing. The revision is going to be listed under the current tab that we've been using, which is the present tab, as a revision to this manual. So I just wanted to clarify that we are not going to be setting up a new page to this, and there isn't going to be a set implementation date, as there's no permit regulated driven changes to this manual. You're not seeing a change in numbers of what you're treating, what projects are required to provide LID. The updates to this manual particularly are specifically clarifications, additional documents that we'll be wanting to see from consultants that are submitting to our various agencies. So we're trying to provide you guys more information of what we're expecting. So there's hopefully a reduction in back and forth, and it's not so confusing or being guessed at the documents that we want to see. As before, the version that your project's going to be obligated to comply with is going to be based on the CEQA permit approval dates and the project specific conditions of approval. So that's not going to be changed. Just for the point, if this presentation comes out aside from this video, I just wanted to clarify that we all know what permit we're talking about. In my world, it's the permit. But we're all talking about the order number R1 2015-003, also referred to as the MS4 permit and stormwater permit. Changes to the appendices and reference documents. There's no major substantive changes in that forms, lists, tables have not changed. What did change is the Appendix G sample pervious concrete specification and Appendix H, the final SUSUMP submittal guide, have been removed. And the reference document G, which is the TR55 manual, has been added. Just a note on these documents, the appendices and reference documents, we are going to be adding, City of Santa Rosa is going to be adding these as the appendices will be one PDF and the reference document will be one PDF. And we're going to have these very clearly listed on that current web page. So it should be a little easier to find moving forward. One of the first major changes is we added a definition for full depth reclamation. And it's defined as a reclamation technique in which full flexible pavement sections and a predetermined portion of the underlying materials are uniformly crushed, pulverized, or blended, resulting in a stabilized base course. I've included an image if you haven't seen the process, but basically there's a huge grinding blade that relays it down after mixing it in place. This was an important definition that we wanted to supply because we've also added notes and clarifications throughout the manual that FDR can be regarded as a maintenance activity, which is exempt as long as it is not part of a larger development or redevelopment project, does not change pre-project drainage patterns, and does not expand the footprint of the road. This is something that had been talked about, but it had not been put on paper anywhere yet. So now we have it on paper for you guys, or in this world, a PDF. The next one, I think a lot of people on this call will probably know this, but we added it for clarity so that we're all saying the same thing. A pervious surface, for the purposes of this manual, are areas that allow for stormwater infiltration into underlying soil as it would occur in undeveloped location in an unaltered condition. We've also chosen to define subgrade. The agency representatives have heard a number of questions about, well, what exactly is subgrade? And the definition that came up was somewhat taken from the construction general permit, and that we went with the portion of a roadway on which pavements, surfacing, aggregate base, subbase, or a layer of any other material is placed, also known as the grading plane, or the point at which soil would be exposed and or disturbed. So I gave you a couple examples of what we're seeing to clarify this. And on the right, you'll see a typical example, and this particular one didn't have a call out, but the gray earth hatching was called out on that plan set as the subgrade native soil. So as you can see in this typical section, this is a pretty clear visual representation that this project is going to be exposing subgrade. The other word that we're seeing on a lot of projects, which is tied to the subgrade, is reconstruction. So I just added a note here that reconstruction would be an LID trigger. So reconstruction has a very specific term for stormwater people and our permit. So if you don't mean reconstruction, but your project says reconstruction all over it and the agencies receive the project, we're gonna have questions about your LID. So I just wanted to highlight that in the subgrade. I know other disciplines don't see it that way, but it's definitely a trigger word with us stormwater folks. Another thing that we've highlighted throughout the manual more is the trash amendment. The trash amendment is the state water boards water quality control plan for ocean waters and the water quality control plan for inland surface waters and closed bays and estuaries. This is where the full capture of trash comes from through the use and reissued permit provisions of the MS4. So this provision, our MS4 permit calls out that you must meet the obligations of this trash amendment. The trash amendment requires that all debris particles 5 millimeters or greater in size must be trapped to meet the full capture. I know this has been a question for a lot of people, so a couple slides from now, I'll clarify a little bit more on that topic. A few other things to pay attention to. There weren't major revisions, but there were changes to our definitions of hydromodification control, reconstruction, redevelopment, trash capture, and 100% volume capture. Another major change in Chapter 1 is in regards to vegetated cover. Text throughout the manual, not exclusive to Chapter 1, has been revised to the following: allowing for approval of when 50% vegetated cover is not established before the completion of construction. When that is the case, two things need to occur. Your jurisdictional agency, when they're doing your plan review, is going to be looking for an erosion control plan for the LID PMPs with sufficient measures to provide soil stabilization and treatment until plant maturity. For example, ground up, compost and mulch on all bare soils with rock inlet protection. Just a note, we don't want to be seeing bark. We don't want to be seeing floatables that can enter the storm drain system without any sort of control. So we're specifically looking for things like compost, ground up compost and mulch that's not going to float directly into the inlet with our first few storm events. The second thing we'll be needing to see is a planting and irrigation plan for the LID BMPs that includes by plants, genus, species, and common name, selected plants, maximum spacing, total number of plants to be installed, and a table with the mature plant size. Again, this is specifically if you're looking for approval when 50% vegetated cover is not going to be established at the completion of construction. Another important revision to footnote 2, which can be easily lost, is the discussion about items that are considered routine maintenance. We've added a few clarifications on this to specifically call out a few additional items, which includes FDR being regarded as a routine maintenance activity. For activity to be routine maintenance, it must not change existing lines and grades or hydraulic capacity. Minor changes to line or grade of 0.2 feet or less shall be considered as maintaining original line and grade. Replacement of existing pedestrian ramps to maintain compliance with the current ADA requirements shall be regarded as routine maintenance. So there's a number of new additions to this footnote. The main change to the figure 1 flowchart is highlighting that these projects need to meet trash capture requirements. So in these purple boxes, the trash capture to all tributaries has been added. We've also clarified this further in the tables 1 and 2. So this is just an example of how we clarified it out. It does depend on the various descriptions of the tributary areas, but it is a note, for example, on this one, that tributary areas consist of both existing and new and or replaced impervious surfaces must meet the trash amendment, which is the 5 millimeter clause. Additionally, the LID BMPs must capture the 100 microns in diameter or larger requirement for the LID measures. So this is the text backing up the same statement. This is not a new requirement. This trash capture is not a new requirement. We found that it just wasn't being clarified because it is a little bit hidden in our MS4 permit. So we specifically called out the requirement. We also removed the plant survival warranty requirements section and added a description of on-site offset. So one thing that the agencies are going to be looking when they approve these documents is we want to see a very clear justification when any lower level BMP is selected over a higher level BMP. Our language is anytime a lower priority BMP is selected, justifications shall be provided for reasons why higher level priority BMPs are deemed inappropriate. If we get a summary or your submittal documents without the statement, that's going to be one of our first questions back for a revision. Oops. Finally, just to point out a few of them, make sure there's some minimal changes to the submittals, but justification of the lower priority BMPs. We're requiring to see the maintenance and funding sources, which will be touched on. An example will be shown a little bit later in these presentations today of that. And then, of course, the required planting, erosion control, irrigation, and inlet protection if needed. And that's all I got. When we release this manual, please make sure to read through it, but these are some of the major changes that we thought you'd all be interested in.
All right, does anybody have any questions for Flannery or additional clarifications that weren't addressed that need to be put in the manual? Go ahead, Pete.
Mute. Will your slides be available?
Yes, they will.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yep.
Go ahead, Matt.
So are you saying that the 5 millimeter will be enforced on undeveloped parts of the property and that the 100 micron is enforced in anything that drains to an LID feature? Or I'm not clear on where they're both enforced.
It depends on your catchments and how it's broken up. And I'm probably going to trip over this a little bit. But if your project as part of the whole phase has areas that are undeveloped that are still draining to the same catchment location, we would still be required to do the 5 millimeter requirement. Sometimes what we see is there'll be portions that are part of the construction project that are then going to a DI, but it still has the possibility to generate trash. I don't, Elizabeth, if you're on the line, I know you've explained that one a few times. If you have a better way to state it.
No, what I had figured out that if it's over an acre, you definitely have to do the whole thing because it's all taken care of via the LID features. It's under an acre that you have to worry about which one you have to do. So I don't.
The tables are a little useful to that. I don't have every single catchment listed out, but we did list it by scenario in the tables as to which one would probably be applicable.
All right.
I have a question if we have a moment.
Yep, go for it.
This is Steve Anselm with Coastland Civil Engineering. I just wanted to go back to the FDR and the reconstructed structural section.
Yep.
You mentioned on the routine maintenance exemptions, it was rehab of the structural section of the roadway. One of the things we found, particularly in the city of Santa Rosa, we do water and sewer projects. You know, the scope of work includes reconstructing the entire street. And what we find is that the existing pavement section is quite weak or minimal thickness. You know, typically we've seen 2 inches of AC over like 4 inches of AB.
Sure.
And, you know, to design a road to current standards, you know, current traffic indexes, that structural section needs to be much thicker or much deeper. So one of the things we've run into is that technically we would be getting into the subgrade of the roadway, and many of the projects greatly exceed the 10,000 square feet, but they're still short enough of projects where the FDR process is not economical. Generally, those are longer projects because you have a lot of equipment to be mobilized to make it cost effective. Like a project like Stony Point reconstruction would be, you know, a candidate for FDR, but like a residential street would not be. So my question is, if we have to thicken the roadway section and get into the subgrade, technically we're still rehabbing the existing roadway structural section, but does that trigger the stormwater requirements, LID requirements, and more specifically, you know, how do we go about doing that in a site, you know, residential area where we have, you know, curb and gutter and sidewalk, you know, contiguous sidewalk with no areas for planters?
Yeah, so that does trigger LID if you're entering the subgrade. The exemption to that would be a super T trench, where you can do trench work specifically for utilities, and it can be that larger super T trench. But the board has clarified with the co-permittees that as soon as you're exposing or entering the subgrade, that you're going to be triggering LID. So a project can be an exempt project until the point at which it does a activity which is not an exempt activity. So if it follows that flow chart and the pavement section is exposing or entering the subgrade, by the permit definition, that when it's excavation to roadway subgrade, it is considered reconstruction, and reconstruction is not a maintenance activity. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It just, and that was my understanding as well. I just wanted to clarify with you, but I guess more specifically then is if we have an existing residential street, you know, we have basically the right of way is at the back of sidewalk on both sides.
Right, and
install LIDs is in an existing condition like that is difficult, and not to mention very costly for, you know, agencies like, you know, City of Santa Rosa, Town of Windsor, et cetera. So I was just, you know, it's more probably an issue that we have to deal with on the design end. But, you know, maybe if there's something you've seen in the past on a previous city project that you can share, that'd be appreciated.
yeah, a lot of the ways that I've seen this successfully dealt with within limited right of ways is you end up losing a couple parking spots to do a bulb out design. You can also use that as traffic calming. And you want to make it nice. You want to make it nice for the local residents and have it be really a green streets feature, right? And in this part of the industry, we really are focusing of thinking these less as an engineering thing, and we want to think of it as also adding value for our citizens is a nice landscaped green feature as well. So that's one of the more applicable ones. There are ways to design these as flow throughs. So speaking for Santa Rosa, in our flatter areas, these can be designed in a way where the water would enter through a gutter pan into one of these bulb outs. And then in locations where we have our valley gutters and have long stretches with no main lines, it would come back out to the valley gutter. Of course, you need to provide appropriate protection so that you aren't getting floatables or various other things coming back onto the roadway out of these features. But those are some of the design features that you can deal with that limited right of way.
Thank you.
Flannery, there's a lot of really great questions that are coming in through chat. And so just in the interest of time, and then hopefully being able to address some of this at the Q&A at the end, I would recommend you hopping into chat and trying to answer those 4 questions that are currently in there.
Yep.
And then for all of you on the call, this is great. You keep up the questions, keep them coming. And we're going to continue to try to address those in chat and then at the Q&A at the end. So thanks, Flannery, for that update. And next, we've got a case study presented by Jonathan Caldwell from the city of Cotati and Kevin McDonald from Mo Engineering. And I would request maybe, John, do you mind just starting and telling us why you selected this case study?
Right. Thanks, Nick. So yeah, good morning, John Caldwell, City of Cotati, Department of Public Works, Civil Engineer, also sometimes known as the Cotati Stormwater Coordinator. We wear many hats here at a small jurisdiction like this. I'm here to introduce our next speaker who will be presenting this case study too on our behalf. We elected the latest thing here in Cotati private development, which is the 40 division on the hillside site known as the preserve at Redwood Highway on the southern side of Cotati. This development triggered LID requirements. And Kevin McDonald with Mo Engineering is here to briefly discuss the stormwater review process and highlight some of the key components of what made for an acceptable LID design. The goal is to shed some light and give some tips on what goes into the LID review and approval process. I figured that Kevin would be a good one to go through this for you, as Mo Engineering assisted us, the city, with the project development review, not to mention various other aspects of the project, including inspections during construction that continue to date. So with that, Kevin, thanks for helping us with this, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
Thanks, John. I'll share my screen here. And let's see. So as John mentioned, I'm a civil engineer in private practice, and we do LID review for the city of Cotati. And this new subdivision John talked about here, Kessing Ranch, yeah, it's a treat to show a little of what's going on in Cotati. And we've chosen a project that's a fairly straightforward subdivision. It's 47 lots on 3.7 acres. It's on a hillside that presents some challenges, but let's see. One of the key things to remember is that subdivisions change over time. Here's the layout of the subdivision, but the earlier view we took of it had a street down the middle. So you need to stay in touch with all the details of the initial submittals to the final submittals. In fact, this project was first submitted in 2009 with 64 units, not the 47 that it ended up with. And 2009 actually predates Cotati's inclusion in the MS4 permitting system. The preliminary SUSUM came in 2016, and the final stormwater not till 2018. So things change, and need to stay in touch with that. Let's see here. So in the submittal, many important parts are included. First is a good project description, and not just of what's being built, but also of how they're planning to treat. So this project calls out that there's hydromodification in 100% volume capture. That's important there. And then how they plan to capture that. What are the measures included? And in this particular project, they broke it into 2 different basins. So all the water from the whole subdivision into 2 basins. That minimizes the number of calculations, but it does put a lot of water in one place. Further, they detailed that the runoff from the roof downspouts, driveways, new pavement. So they're commenting on all the important parts of the project stormwater collection. And that's important for a reviewer to see this and then be able to track that through the project. In addition, they talk about the treatment and volume capture as a specific element here, and that it's going to be into a rain garden or swale process. And then also a key part, the maintenance and funding. You know, we need to be able to be sure that that there's a plan for maintaining this long term, and that plan is funded. Okay, these are all just the details that we checked. And then of course, the first detail is, does this project hit the triggers? And since it's over an acre, yes, it does. And here are the 2 basins on the project, one on each side of here, top of hill, all of the water drains downhill to there. They call out and separate all of the tributary area, and they have a graphic here of how the tributary areas work. It makes for a very clear understanding for the reviewing party. In addition, this is the exhibit in the submittal. They include a detail from the Santa Rosa manual of what retention they're going to use. It's very, very clear presentation. And then they get into the calculation element. Each of the drainage areas needs to have the calculation clearly presented, showing also what reduction measures. And in this case, they do take credit for it. So again, attention to detail from the reviewer and consistency between documents. Often things get flagged as one in one document, but different in another. And it's an attention to detail aspect. And then the bottom line is, do they have the 100% capture, and with what method? So in the below ground here, they identify an area rather than a length and width, and that's an acceptable. They also identify the depth in that volume area, and that'll translate through to plans. You need to keep an eye on that element. Over here, they allow for water above ground surface, which has a maximum of a ½ a foot. And again, it's an area, not a length and width. So these are just details to keep in touch with as we move into reviewing the plans. On the plans, they show the inlet areas, the 2 tributary inlet areas that are the 2 pipes that feed into this one basin, but all the elevations are key. And I've added a little table up here so that we can see the outlet area at the catch basin has an elevation shown on it, and the contour sets the difference between the outlet and the basin, and that's a ½ foot, as noted in the calculations previously. Then showing that there's a foot of landscaping fill on top of that. The plans show the elevations of the actual rock retention area, and so that's important to see that they in fact capture the 1.5 feet that they called out. And this is a second, the second of the 2 drainage area basins, or the second rain garden. a lot of detail here as to what elevations. It's good, clear for the construction contractor to do his grading to. And that's a photo of how it actually turned out constructed. And also somewhere on the plans it's important to again have the rain garden that was shown in the calculation and submittals early on. There's a certain amount of consistency that needs to be had that is the elements we check for. So the elements that, in addition to all those tied together parts, there's a few other lessons that come to mind at the end of this process. And one is, when is the right time to record the maintenance agreement with the county, which is one of the steps to, necessary in this process. And what we're finding is that it's best to receive a executed maintenance agreement with the development at the time of plan approval. And things change in construction, and that's to be expected that some change occurs. So we don't record it immediately. We sit on an executed document till we can confirm and inspect that the BMPs have been constructed per plan. And only then do we take the document and record it with the county. A lot of the lessons of this from the reviewer point of view is that all of the LID submittal needs to be confirmed with plans. And that's usually not trouble with the civil firms, but coordinating with landscaping is the challenge. And so getting good attention to the landscaping plans is also one of the elements we focus on. And then not just that the plans are confirmed, but that actual construction goes the way it should. And again, the plans are the common communication tool with construction contractors, and that goes well, but less so with landscaping construction. A lot of times we find the base materials contaminated by irrigation efforts or other efforts. So communication with the landscaping firm when the construction starts is one of the other keys. I'd like to give a little shout out to the design engineer of this particular project, Adobe Associates, for having submittals and plans that are super clear, easy to review, and easy to construct accurately. And with that, I think we're there, Nick.
That's beautiful. 5 minutes early, enough time for questions. There was a question that came in for you. And Yoash wanted to know if drawdown calculations and BMP site-specific infiltration tests were provided demonstrating no standing water after 72 hours.
Alas, I don't recall on this project. So I'll have to take a pass on that answer.
Yoash, you want to just chime in? And is that something that the county requires on a project like that?
I believe it's something that the water board requires, and if not, then let's flush it out right now. Standing water after 72 hours creates vectors, create a health problem. A standard comment in for BMP priority 1, where standing water is going to be proposed. We need to make sure that water is going to drain and infiltrate into the underlying soil within 72 hours. And therefore, there are two means to demonstrate it. One is the drawdown calculations, and both need to be provided. And two is site-specific infiltration tests. That's why we see a lot of priority 2 BMPs, because they don't want the standing water.
Thank you, Yoash. Any other questions for Kevin or John? Jonathan loves questions, by the way. You can kind of tell the way he's sitting back. So you should ask all the tough ones to him.
By the way, Nick, do we still have someone from the water board online with us today?
We don't. So what we're going to end up doing, if there's questions to be taken to the water board, we're going to take them back, and I'll coordinate with Brendan and Heaven, and then we can filter them back out to the group.
Sounds good.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
Hi, this is Carol Dugas. I don't have my video on. I'm wondering about the public storm drain system. it was really hard to see the drawings, but I assume that there's a public storm drain system pipe in those streets, and that they're probably public streets, and that the streets, it kind of goes from the lots into the public street, into the public storm drain system, and then it goes into private property. So, and then it goes through the treatment basin and then it exits out. Is that correct?
Yes, each of the lots exits onto the public street, the new developed subdivision street, which then conveys to the basins at the low elevation of the development.
So one of the concerns that I see is that the city might have some liability because the water is not being treated before it goes into the public storm drain system. I can see that per the calculations, one basin for a subdivision will be adequate to the state board. But I think that there's some liabilities that the cities have to consider, that these flows that are untreated go into the storm drain system, you know, and then flow back onto private property and then exit back out to the public system. So like, just say, you know, one of the neighbors wanted to dump his oil out into the gutter, and it got into the storm drain pipe, and then it got up into this basin. So
yeah, I agree with what you're saying and understand the risk. The basins are owned by the homeowners association of the properties, and all the drainage is from the homeowners, from the member homeowners. But you make a good point.
Just wondering if that's been a consideration. Has the city of Cotati required like a liability release from the developers or the homeowners association in case some situation would occur where the pollutants from the public system are getting into their private property and maybe requiring it to be replaced or something sooner than it might need to be?
Well, all will still run through the homeowner basin prior to, you know, discharge. But you make a good point, and the city has tools to do that during the planning and condition of approval phase, and you know, that's a good discussion for each city to probably carry forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Carol. So just in the interest of time, we are going to move on. And next we wanted, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, John. Next, we wanted to introduce Ben Kagiyama from the city of Healdsburg to discuss common mistakes, errors, and omissions with LID submittals.
Thanks, Nick. Kevin, if you can unshare your screen. Great. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Good, Ben.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Kagiyama, Senior Civil Engineer with the City of Healdsburg Public Works Department, and I'll be discussing some common mistakes, errors, or omissions with stormwater LID submittals. I've been with the City of Healdsburg for 2 years now, and prior to that, 13 years at the City of Ukiah. My current role is the city's Stormwater Program Manager, and I also review LID submittals for new development projects. Both Healdsburg and Ukiah are small cities by any measure, so my experience with LID project review may be limited compared with larger agencies that see a much greater number of projects. But I expect many of the problems I've encountered will be the same in all of our co-permittee jurisdictions, and I hope this will be helpful. It all starts with the LID determination worksheet, which must be filled out for all projects and signed by the applicant. Often this is missing or submitted without being signed, which is the first common omission I'll mention. It's an important document for the public agency to have in their project files, whether LID is triggered or not. So make sure you get a signed worksheet from the applicant and review it for accuracy. If you're the consultant, be sure to look at this closely during the conception of the project so you understand if LID is triggered, and submit the signed worksheet with the application. If there are any questions about the LID triggers, don't hesitate to discuss the project with the local agency directly. It's very important to be clear about the project requirements early in the process. For both consultants preparing the SW-LID submittal and for public agencies reviewing it, the first thing is to check for completeness. Chapter 6 of the LID manual spells out the submittal requirements in detail, but there's also a convenient SW-LIDS checklist in the submittal guide, which can be found in the LID manual tools and reference documents. This I'm not sure, Flannery mentioned that the submittal guide might be removed from the update. So that's something I want to look into. Hopefully some form of checklist will still be available. Be sure to check carefully for consistency between the various application components, which is where I usually find errors. These include all of the parts of the SW-LID submittal and the other documents of the development application. These components include the SW-LIDS narrative, existing and proposed exhibit maps. These maps should show pervious and impervious areas, tributary areas, soil type, proposed BMPs, etc. BMP selection tables, stormwater calculator, BMP details, the maintenance plan, which is typically part of the narrative and defines the funding source, identifies the responsible party, and provides detailed maintenance checklist for the BMPs. Improvement plans, including site, grading and drainage, and utility plans, and also detail sheets. Landscape plans, which includes the planting and irrigation plan. And typically there's a soils report that will indicate the soil type on the project site. Some common problems include the tributary areas in the stormwater calculator not being consistent with what is shown on the plans. A BMP selection table is not provided for each and every tributary area. The BMP priority is not matching the soil type in the SW-LIDS narrative or in the soils report. No written justification is provided for using a lower priority level. Remember, the highest priority BMP possible must always be used. Improper use of pavement or roof drain disconnect credit. Note that the credit is only used when runoff from pavement or roof drain is filtered through a landscape buffer before it reaches the rain garden or BMP, and not if it discharges directly into the BMP. Failure to treat areas of new or replaced impervious areas in public rights-of-way and PUEs. Engineering firms using their own calculation sheets instead of the stormwater calculator. Trash capture not being addressed. Note that using an on-site offset can apply to delta volume capture, but not to treatment and trash capture. Not showing the BMP depth on the grading plans. This can be shown in the table listing the BMP depth, length, width, and overall volume, which makes it easy to check against the SW-LIDS report. BMP is not clearly identified. Each BMP requires a unique identifier keyed to the plans and details, calculations, and BMP selection tables. Missing or inadequate details of the BMPs. For example, details should include curb cut details showing a drop at the curb opening with rock protection, surface slopes, overflow structure details, BMP typical sections showing the thickness and specifications of the various layers, moisture barriers, etc. Missing detailed maintenance plan. A maintenance checklist must be included that is specific to the BMPs proposed in the project. Lack of a planting plan and plant selection information. If a proposed BMP plan is not on the approved plant list, written justification of the plant's suitability should be provided. Lack of an irrigation plan. Even drought-tolerant plants won't survive without being watered to get established. Finally, I would add errors due to poor coordination between consultants. For example, between the architect preparing the site plan, the landscape architect preparing the landscape plans, and the civil engineer preparing the civil plans. Make sure the various plans are consistent with each other and any subsequent revisions are reflected on all of the plans. On some projects, a different consultant may be responsible for the LID design other than the project civil, and that presents another layer of coordination that can result in errors. Keep in mind that the SWLID submittal, including BMP plans and maintenance plan, will be referred to for many years after the project's built. So it's important they be clear and understandable to future property owners and laypersons seeking to understand what was built and how to maintain it.
Hey, Ben, does the city of Hillsburg require exhibit maps every time? Are they always needed?
Exhibit maps and what? In the maintenance?
So the question is, are existing exhibit maps always needed?
In the maintenance agreement?
I think from your previous slide, from your submittal.
Oh.
If you go back a slide, I think you have up there existing and proposed exhibit maps.
Yes.
So the question is, are they always needed?
Yes. Yes, they should always be. You always have to have that.
And Nick, that wasn't specific to Healdsburg. That's across all the co-permittees.
Yeah. So these are just a few typical issues to look out for. If I were to offer 3 simple suggestions for improved SWLID submittals, I would say 1, to ensure a complete submittal, refer to the SWLID's checklist or the chapter 6. 2, review your applications carefully for consistency. And 3, get feedback from your local agency staff throughout the project development process. I think I can say this on behalf of all of the MS4 co-permittee agencies. We are available and happy to assist with your LID projects. Nick?
Are you done?
Yep.
All right. Well, you know what? Just because you were one of the first ones on the call, I'm gonna let you a little bit off the hook, just in the spirit of time. And so what I would tell everybody is make Ben squirm on chat and make him respond to really tough questions. But otherwise, we're gonna give him a little bit of break and maybe table some questions for the final Q&A specifically for Ben.
Nick, I have one quick addition.
Go for it.
Ben, you commented on that appendix that's being removed. Santa Rosa's, we have multiple projects spanning multiple LID manuals, so we are not removing our previous links to appendices. So you can go back to a previous version and still grab that appendix. Not you, everyone.
Nick, may I ask a question? This is Josh.
Is it short?
It's short.
You promise?
I promise.
All right, we're gonna hold you to it.
Please do, because what I'm trying to do is, like you said at the beginning of this conversation, I work with a lot of these people on a daily basis and questions come up, and this is a good forum to talk about these things. In short.
Go for it.
So one of the items that were brought up here, and the question was, are existing exhibit maps always needed? I believe the reason that question was brought up is because if someone is proposing to do 100% volume capture, they're not looking at the pre-development condition. They're only looking at the proposed, and therefore they would provide to us only the proposed condition map. That's, I think, why that question may have been risen. That's it. Thank you.
That's a great clarification. Thank you, Josh. All right. So thanks, Ben. I really appreciate that. And for our last case study, before we get into an open Q&A here, I wanted to introduce Oriana Hart from the County of Sonoma and reintroduce Elizabeth Cargay from the town of Windsor. And they are going to discuss maintenance agreements.
All right. Hold on, let me get my screen shared. Okay. Good morning. I'm Oriana Hart from Sonoma County Stormwater Program. I am responsible for making sure that all the county departments are in compliance with our various MS4 permit requirements, including the LID development standards reviewed by PRMD's engineering department. I will be co-presenting today with Elizabeth Cargay of the town of Windsor, who spoke earlier. If a development requires LID BMPs on site, these BMPs are required to be maintained forever. This is often forgotten or overlooked as engineers and builders move away from the project and the developer sells or leases the project to other parties that are not familiar with our county's LID program. This results in a gap of understanding around the requirements and inspections that will be undertaken forever, or at least for the life of the development. One second, while my slide changes. Uh-oh. There we go. As part of the initial stormwater LID submittal to your jurisdiction, a draft of the final declaration and covenant, or DOC, is required to be submitted. This document that will be recorded on the deed of the property prior to the closeout of the project. This document spells out the requirements placed upon the owners of the property once everyone else involved in the project has left. Included with this document, there will need to be an exhibit for the legal description of the property. In Sonoma County, we require a pared down version of the stormwater submittal plan showing just the final location and type of BMPs that will be included in the DOC. So then when we go out to inspect the project 2 years after completion, we can easily find the BMPs and can identify what they are and the vegetated components associated with them. Finally, a draft operation and maintenance plan must be submitted with the preliminary stormwater LID document, and Elizabeth is going to talk about the format of these maintenance plans.
Thanks, Ariana. So the town has reviewed a bunch of these maintenance plans, and we really find that it's they're completely varied, and it makes it very difficult to really review and find all the information that's required in these things. So this slide kind of shows what's required by the LID manual. And so it shows that you have to have how you're going to do your inspections, who's responsible for doing these maintenance and inspections, how often you need to do it, what costs are associated with maintenance and inspections, replacement costs. And then we also, we created a template that also added some of these things in where we had background. What is LID? We have homeowners that have no idea what LID even is. So we have a background, a description of each of the LIDs, a summary table that shows how many are there and what are they, and then common identifiers. We've created specific identifiers for each type of LID feature so that we as the town get a bunch of these different LID features. We can have a map that we know what they are very easily. So the point of this is to have a standard O&M plan, and we created a template. So it makes it easy for the engineer to just fill in the necessary project information. It makes it easier for us to review because we have the same setup every single time and I know where to find things. And then it makes it really easy for the homeowner to be really clear and have simple directions on what they need to do. So let's see. The main three things that you need to have for maintenance are the map or the exhibit that shows all the BMPs, the details of each of these, and then a summary table. Those are the most important things. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So we created this template for all the engineers to use. And what it is, we had Christina Goulart from GHD help me put this together. And this is a table of contents. So basically there's 4 different sections here and some attachments. So we have an introduction, and this gives background. We have some standardized language. I'll show you in the next page. But we also have who has to be, who's the responsible person for maintenance, and do they have training? You know, if it's in an HOA, you can't just be one of the homeowners. It's got to be somebody that is actually designated. What are the features in the next section? And it kind of gives the table, it gives the details, it talks about the funding, what about the plants and everything. And then the 4th section is actually the maintenance activities. the training of responsible parties, and we have standards that we've created for maintenance. Next slide. So this is the first page of it, and you see some yellow highlighted areas, and that's language that we give kind of like instruction to the engineers. It's like the first line says, provide an introduction about stormwater LID BMP features. What is LID? And then we have suggested language to include. We give you something to make it easy. It can be standard. You can put whatever you want, and this is a Word document. You can change it. We have it up on our website for the town of Windsor. We're asking all projects to use this. And then it goes into the background, understanding why we do this. Again, a lot of this is for the homeowner because they're going to be having to maintain these things, or whoever is going to be maintaining them. And then you can see like the project description. It actually describes how many of what type of BMPs are they? Are they public? Are they private? Just so everybody understands the project and what they're going to have to maintain. Next page. So this is the funding part. So we have a table here, a standardized table that says, okay, you have 3 bioretention swales. Now give us an idea of the annual operations and maintenance costs. And then if you had to replace that, give us an idea of what that costs. And this is something we asked our town attorney, and she suggested that this actually be in the document. And we actually record this document with the DOC. I know some other jurisdictions don't, but we do. She said she thought it was really important that a homeowner know not only what the features are, but what it's going to take to maintain those. Am I in for $5,000 a year? Am I in for $500 a year? And what exactly do I have to do? So when they sign and they get this document, they know exactly what they're going to have to do. Next page. So this is one of our standards that we're using for each type of BMP. This, this gives the 11 different things that they should look for in a bioretention feature. And it also gives the frequency of tasks. So we've kind of stated what we thought was a minimum of what we would like homeowners or HOAs or whatever to actually complete. So it's in one page, it's for each type of BMP. It actually tells them what they need to do, remove the trash, remove the sediment, but it's very quick and easy to see in one page. Okay, next page. So this is a simplified map that we've created so we can show everybody, this is what we want to see. We want to see clarity. So we've asked for color coding of different types of BMPs and the locations. And it also has a table there that shows the features, the size, the depth, the type of plants by certain acronyms that we've defined, and we standardized all of our acronyms. And so it's easy for a homeowner, it's easy for the town to be able to see where are these features, how big are they, how many of them are there, and what are they. Next slide. And then this is gives you an idea of what we've got also in the template. We've created these identifications, and they're part of the unique identifiers that Ben was talking about. So if you have a living roof, say, on your site, it would be LF-1. If you have a interceptor tree, it's TR-1. If you have 10 of them, it's TR1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we know exactly what they are, and it's the same every time. And we're going to use these to put into our GIS system. And it's the same with the plants. We find a lot of times that we don't get the plant information, and we really want to be able to know, and the homeowner needs to know what kind of plants are out in my yard. And if something dies, how do I get that fixed? They can go to this and the page before on the map, and it'll show exactly which BMP and what plants are in that BMP. It'll say P1, P3, P7. They know that those 3 plants were in there, so one dies, they can find it easily. And so this template is something to use as a guide. It can certainly be changed to fit your particular project, but keeping the same overall titles of each section really helps all of us, I think, in the long run, and that we can get all the information. We don't have to go back and forth in review, and that the homeowner can really know what they're responsible for. And then I'm going to turn it back over to the county so that she can, Oriana can tell you about one of the maps that the county has and some additional information that they would like to see.
Okay, this is an example of one of Sonoma County's recent BMP location maps to be recorded with the declaration. Unlike the previous example from Windsor, this document is shown in black and white as it will be recorded on the deed and at the assessor's office, and the assessor does not record in color. So the BMPs are clearly called out. There will be permeable pavement. There are bioretention basins on the private property, as well as some up on the right-of-way that are identified separately. And there's an infiltration trench over here. There's also vegetation features throughout. Our plan checkers cross-check the vegetation types against the landscape sheets and the building plans to ensure that the vegetation is in compliance with the LID manual. In the new release of the LID manual, we will also be requiring that the BMP maps include how the features will be accessed. This is an especially important component of housing developments that choose to place BMPs in the backyards where access is potentially restricted. The developers, as well as future owners that review the recorded documents on the deed, should have some forethought as to how the co-permittee staff can access the BMPs for inspections. So this is just a flow chart of the DOC process. At the end of the project, the developer signs a statement accepting responsibility for maintenance of BMPs until the responsibility is legally transferred. This responsibility should be a written condition of any sale or lease agreement in enough detail to be easily understood by future owners and tenants. The conditions should make clear that the property owner or tenant is responsible for BMP maintenance and to conduct inspections at least once a year. The property owners should submit to their jurisdictions annually the results of these stormwater BMP inspections. The inspections include, but are not limited to, the maintenance checklists, photo evidence of the BMP's existing conditions, a report of any maintenance activity, remediation, and replacement of the BMP features. Failure to maintain the BMPs will lead to progressive enforcement against the owner where necessary to rectify the failure to implement maintenance of post-construction BMPs. And this can ultimately lead to the county notifying the Regional Water Board and asking for their involvement to correct the issues if necessary. So this was leading into a talk from Ukiah that I'm not sure we're having, but anyways, these are some of my post-construction inspection pictures. I see a lot of well-maintained and functioning vegetation swales and detention areas from various LID manual versions. The top bad maybe once had plants when the project finished, but now 2 years later, when I inspected it, they are long gone. This was an immediate corrective issue, and they have been replanted, and the area around the drain inlet has been protected. And the bottom one is a reminder of what in our current LID version is called the plant warranty. This project finished in 2016, and I did for the first inspection in 2018, and the plants looked healthy and the landscape was well maintained. And in 2020, when I did this inspection earlier this year, the plants are scarce and kind of straggly. The landscape maintenance is a continual process beyond the warranty period and for the lifetime of the development. And finally, this is one of my favorite photos of a bioretention basin in Petaluma. It's working perfectly and is currently well maintained, but without the owners being aware of what this feature is and the requirements to maintain it, I would imagine I could easily be mistaken for a natural depression and filled in or utilized for some different purpose. And that's all we got.
Any questions?
There was one that came in, is how often should bioretention or structural soil and plants be excavated and completely replaced?
So when it fails, if it's not infiltrating any longer, that's one of the key things. That's why you want to keep it up every year. And if you're getting a lot of fine sediment, you want to get that out of there. Some of the manufacturers also have requirements. So you want to check what there's actually requires. Some, of the, some of the trees, they're required to change out the soil every so often, like every 5 years. So it could be either way.
Great. Well, I think we should open it up just in the spirit of time. We've got 8 minutes until 11 o'clock, and just being respectful of people's times. We're happy to stay on longer for questions. But, you know, just some final thoughts from me is that, as many of you are aware, LID features live beyond the construction phase and are required to be maintained in perpetuity. So as a condition of our MS4 permits, these are required to be maintained and inspected periodically. Generally speaking, most of us try to inspect these annually. However, the current requirement is that at minimum, they're done every other year. So, you know, it is something to take into consideration, and something potentially for discussion from the co-permittees on the line is if you guys want to talk about some common issues that you're experiencing when you actually go out to inspect these that could potentially be addressed in design and construction, this is a great opportunity to do that. The other thing is, before I open it up for Q&A, I just want to say that this year we did not go over the stormwater calculator, but we do want your feedback. And so if there are issues or frustrations or updates that you feel are needed, this is a great forum to let us know, so that we can take care of those and address those. Most likely when we get our permit renewed, we are going to have to do a major revision to the LID manual as part of the iterative process for our permit. And so that would be anticipated potentially in another 2.5 years is my guess. But it just really depends on what the regional board wants to do and what next steps they want to take in terms of LID and the requirements. And then with that, I just want to open it up. I really appreciate all of the participants, all of you participating, and the questions you're asking. I mean, these are fantastic. And again, keep these coming. And if you've got feedback of how we could do these better or what we can focus on going forward, that's also welcomed and warranted. So with that, I will turn it over, and you can ask uncomfortable questions to anybody in this forum.
I'll go ahead and start with some questions left over from my presentation that were in the chat that I didn't address. The questions were, why does the subgrade trigger a problem if the subgrade's reused? Is the problem developed in handling of the material? A finished project would have a finished grade, so they are trying to address the runoff from the AC. So to clarify this, there's a little bit of a two-part answer to this. One is FDR has been incorporated and somewhat considered a maintenance activity. This was a bit of a give by the regional board in that they are recognizing the environmental benefits to reusing the material. And so that's a little in conflict with itself because it would, in theory, expose subgrade. But we had to come up with a way of allowing this without conflicting the current permit language. The next permit is anticipated to address FDR at some point. So that's my first acknowledgement of the question. The second part of that is the intent of these permits is to start mitigating our impacts that we're having to the environment. And part of that process is that we play a little bit of catch up on our existing infrastructure, our existing developed areas. So the way that the board has taken to defining that is once you touch the subgrade, you're not performing a maintenance activity, you're performing reconstruction. And reconstruction projects are your opportunity to implement LID where it had not been previously implemented. So I hope that answers the question that person had and provides a little clarity of why there is that cutoff. So next question. Any more questions?
Well, I just want to bring up something I brought up even last year was floating bark. We talked about that last year, but a lot of landscapers will put in bark as the surface protection, and we do not want floating bark. The other thing is a couple of things that the curb cuts having some protection on those curb cuts to get into the center of the swale is really important, and that it doesn't either sit right at the curb edge. I see a lot of curb cuts that are not maintained, and then they just start filling up with weeds, and then nothing ever gets into it. So we need to maintain that and have some protection, rock protection, and concrete apron or whatever. Put that into the design on each of these curb cuts so it gets all the way into the middle of that LID feature. The other thing we found is LID features that are near sidewalks. And there's a space, there's a little bit of earth between the edge of the sidewalk and the beginning of the LID feature. It's trying to get the water all the way into that LID feature. So we've had to have them actually put plastic that comes up and is actually, well, either you thicken the concrete on the sidewalk so that nothing can get underneath that sidewalk, or you have to put plastic to get it from the roadway all the way into your LID feature, but that you have that direct path that always gets the water in there where it's supposed to be.
Great. Elizabeth and Oriana, you both have 2 questions here. One of them is there are so many failing landscapes found within LID BMPs. My goal as a landscape architect is to use non-planted BMPs as part of the treatment train. What is the best way to approach this? And what is the ratio of vegetation buffer strips, treatment to non-planted BMP area, delta volume? And is it easy to disguise non-planted areas?
I have thought a lot about that because, yeah, a lot of the landscapes just turn into weeds. And so I've thought about putting some sort of those buffer strips of, you know, tall grass between the bottom area, which is maybe rocked, and then you have a buffer strip, and then you have plants. I've seen that. A ratio of buffer strips treatment to non-planted BMP areas. I don't know if there's any.
Elizabeth, can I help for a minute?
Sure.
Do you mind, Nick?
I don't mind at all. Again, I just want to remind everybody it's 11 o'clock, so thank you for your time. You're welcome to hang out and listen to the questions being answered, and we're going to try to answer all the questions that came through. So again, if you can't hang out, we understand, and thank you. And Yoash, go for it.
All right, I think this question is critical in what we do. Going back to what Flannery talked about, the vegetated component of BMPs. The water agency would not allow a BMP to be considered, the water board would not allow a BMP to be considered an LID BMP without a vegetated component. We see plenty of applications that come in with an initial stormwater LID submittal for projects in the county that are not an urban per se area. So there's plenty of vineyards and vegetated areas around. The water can flow through before it gets to what the designer would call the infiltration trench, rock. There must be a vegetated component upstream of that infiltration trench. It's called the vegetated buffer. The width is defined in the cut sheets in the LID manual. There is no ratio. There is a width. The key is that for infiltration trenches specifically, I'd like to address here, because my feeling from the question by the designer here is, how can I minimize the vegetation while satisfying the LID requirements? And the point is that the water board wants you to maximize the vegetation. And the point is the LID allows you to take credit when you use a vegetated buffer, but not in a treatment train. So for example, if you are using a bioretention facility and upstream of it, you also have a 15-foot buffer of grass, lawn, that the water can flow through via, say, a pop-up emitter from the downspouts into the grass, downstream 15 foot into the bioretention. That's more than enough. You can take the credit. But if you have an infiltration trench, which doesn't have the treatment component to it, it must be constructed in a treatment train with the vegetated component, the vegetated buffer upstream. Therefore, you would not be able to take credit and reduce the size of the BMP, the infiltration trench, when using the LID calculator, because it's a treatment train. The calculator allows you to take credit to reduce the size of the BMP. Everybody wants to do that, reduce cost, money, time, everything. However, we need to abide by the rules and regulations. So if the BMP is by a treatment train, that means that you must have that full vegetative component upstream, and the downstream component of the treatment train won't work if you don't have that vegetation. So you can't take credit. So I wanted to go over that for a moment. Thank you for the time.
Thanks.
This
Thank
is
you, Josh.
Dustin. That was my question. And if I'm understanding your answer correctly, it sounds like if we have a 15-foot vegetated buffer, we can use an infiltration trench that's disguised as like a dry stream bed.
That is correct. But my caveat, do not take credit. We're using the LID calculator for it to reduce the size of the infiltration trench. Okay?
Yeah.
Check. Perfect.
Thank you.
There's one more here for Elizabeth and Oriana. The 50% requirement for BMP growth rate before end of construction. Does that mean by October of that year?
You know, it doesn't mean specifically by October. It means by the end of the construction, you've got to have it 50% covered. And if it's not, you got to have some sort of erosion control so that you don't have bare dirt and sediment getting into your BMP. Now, that said, if October comes and you're heading into that rainy season, you better have it covered so that you don't have that sediment moving around. So you have to cover it either way, but there's no definition of end of construction is October.
Great. Is there any other questions that someone's put in chat that we have not answered yet that we should address?
Hello, my name is Nathan Fishman. I have a question, maybe somewhat rudimentary in nature, but I was hoping just to use this as an opportunity. If I can, I was hoping just to share my screen a moment. I was looking at a portion of the manual here, and it's in the area that discusses the efforts or actions we might be able to take to reduce the BMP sizing. And it discusses, at least in this graphic, shows landscape areas that are being directed to inlets, and depicts that, you know, these tributary areas are not necessarily part of the area to be treated for the overall site. So my question is, for 100% landscaped areas, what contributions should we account for in the overall sizing if we're doing treatment or delta volume capture on a site basis elsewhere? Should we include these areas? And also, are these areas subject to trash capture, you know, inlet protections and filters and such? Would that suffice if they're otherwise landscape?
Nathan, I think you can leave that graphic up if you don't mind. It might help the discussion.
I'm happy to. Yeah, and I realize this is a very simple figure, for the reality of it is always more dynamic than this, but I guess I just mean to say that the intent, is there such a thing in this narrative of like a self-treating area? If it is just, you know, a front yard that has some inlets for, you know, high flow events, but otherwise, you know, shouldn't really be contributing pollutants or load, you know, under you know, performing scenario.
So Flannery, do you want to take that? And I would also kind of open this up to the other reviewers on the phone. You may not have presented, but you guys look at this a lot. So if you have input, feel free to chime in. Flannery, do you want to take the first stab here?
Yeah, the first stab is, in general, trash can end up anywhere.
Sure.
So I think the tables will help with this question, because it's broken a little bit down into what your project is proposing. So it's the existing tables you've seen in the manual before, but it has footnotes and call outs of when the 5 millimeter is being triggered. But in short, I would tell you that part of the way you want to think about it is anywhere that people are and that wind can blow, we end up with trash there. And that's part of why in the treatment amendment, you see the requirement for basically all catchments. Whether the retrofitting would have to be done, I'm hesitant to answer that on a broader scale more than I already have, and that it depends on what your project's proposing, where your inlets are, what's being part of the construction, what's not being considered part of the construction, and your tributary catchments. Elizabeth, I know you get this question a lot. I don't know if you have anything to add to that explanation.
No, I'd defer to another co-permittee that deals with that type of stuff more than I do.
Yoash or Oriana from the county, do you have any other further thought on that?
I'd totally punting to Yoash. So, or Steve. I don't know if Steve's still on here.
Kevin here. Just taking a look at this. If the development looks like the graphic, that would be one clear case example. But if the development looked like 10 apartment buildings and a center lawn, could anyone answer that question better? And would the center lawn be able to drop into an inlet, all graded so that the center lawn went to a common inlet and then discharge direct to without storage or treatment? And from our perspective, I would say, well, if we knew there were no improvements in there, but if they were all like common planted backyards that faced to a drain in the common back, we wouldn't consider it exempt. We would say, no, the potential for development is there. It's treated, it's disturbed. We'd expect it to all go to a volume capture or something.
Nick, I think maybe this one is maybe something that we want to get a more specific clarification from the board, because we did try to clarify it in the manual, but there's just so many different situations on this. So maybe that's something that we could work with Brendan and Heaven.
Great. And
Can I
Nathan,
comment on that
great
real
question,
quick?
Nathan. Yes, go for it, Matt.
Okay, so I think it's a great graphic for a designer to look at, but I don't think there's anything in the LID calculator that directly takes care of that. In other words, what you get in the LID calculator is what you get: interceptor trees, disconnected roof drains, paved area disconnection, and buffer strips and bovine terraces, and those are your options.
Okay, thank you all. I appreciate the clarification. I think that's helpful. Thank you for your time.
No, that was fantastic, and I appreciate you using the share screen to give us the visual on that. It is a nice part about this particular platform, rather than us all trying to speak a different language and try to understand what was in your head. So thank you. And I would kind of open it up to if anybody else has something similar where you want to share your screen, happy to relinquish control here. Are there any other questions in regard to LID or clarifications or feedback? All right. Well, you have our email addresses, and we will try to get the presentations that are available out to you. And again, we did record this, so once we get it to a place where it can be viewed, we'll send that link out as well. And I thank you all for participating, and we'll see you next year. And during this course of this next year, if you do have anything that appears anomalous or that needs to be updated, feel free to ping any one of the co-permittees here or any one of the cities or jurisdictions you work in, and we'll make sure to incorporate it in future trainings and clarifications. So thanks again, and we'll see you next year.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Nick and everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.